Right.
And Romney wanted a person, and rightly so, to live wherever they would choose to live.
So you wanted, in other words, the idea was to strengthen state law to end the practice of basically segregated
housing
in certain areas and opening it up, and that was very controversial.
It was at that time.
Yeah.
It was opposed by the Chamber of Commerce. It was opposed by the Real Estate Board, and many other people at that time. Remember, we're not too far removed from the passage of the Civil Rights Act of President Johnson.
Right.
And we're not too far removed from the segregation in the military that occurred in World War II. And,
so you think the fault lines on that were pretty much the same they were on the income tax, that maybe most Democrats probably supported open housing, but it took the more progressive and moderate elements of the Republicans along with the Republican governor to get it through.
Right.
Okay, so that happened. So Romney was pretty much skunked in his presidential run by his Vietnam gaffe, and he pulled out. And then in the election of '68, now the Senate wasn't up for the first time ever. You had a 4-year term, so you're still in control. The House became Democratic in the election of '68. And Bill Ryan became the Speaker of the House, and a Democrat with strong labor ties. And then we come up to 1970. Parochial aid was a huge issue. It was on the ballot in 1970. What can you tell us about that?
Parochial aid was going to provide vouchers for parents, if they sent their children to a private or a religious school.
Okay, was it going to give vouchers to the parents, or was it going to give aid directly to the school?
Well, that hadn't really been determined.
Yeah. Well, at that time,
vouchers, which the word really came later. That went to the individual parents.
Right.
Early on, I suppose parochial aid was going to provide
was really
aid
to the institution.
But
now, this is really fascinating because you had a strange alliance on this issue, strange to many people, between the Roman Catholic Church, which obviously had many parochial schools throughout Michigan, and which were in real financial trouble, and the Christian Reform schools, which you had attended in West Michigan. So you had conservative Republicans from West Michigan, including probably Bob VanderLaan, but correct me if I'm wrong,
I'll correct you.
allied with a lot of otherwise very liberal labor Democrats who were maybe Roman Catholics themselves or had strong Roman Catholic constituencies, particularly in southeastern Michigan. You had all those people aligned against a lot of other people in the legislature and outside the legislature who said, this is not the way to go. We should not be giving public money to non-public education, right?
Right.
And so what happened?
Well, we have to back up a little bit.
Yep.
The first bill I introduced in the Senate was the Fair Bus Bill.
Okay.
The Fair Bus Bill mandated that the public schools pick up private school kids and bring them to their school if it were not too far away from the boundary of the district.
Right.
That bill I introduced, it passed the House, passed the Senate with a great deal of ease, and was signed by George Romney. That was the first major break in the aid to private education.
Right.
That was supported by both Republicans and Democrats, and it was supported by people that really weren't private school people. It passed in the Senate with maybe 1 or 2 dissenting votes.
When we talk about parochial aid, there was not just parochial aid, but there were busing services, auxiliary services.
That's correct, and shared time, where the public school teacher might go into the private school and teach a phys ed class or a music class or something like that. Then the idea of parochial aid was developed primarily by the Michigan Catholic Conference, and it was pushed in the legislature. The legislature in the Senate passed the parochial aid legislation. And the MEA was the chief opponent of it.
The House passed it, too.
The House passed it.
And Milliken signed it. And Milliken came out and said, I support it.
Sure. I did not happen to vote for that.
Oh,
you
you
might
did?
be surprised.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And here again was a discussion with the people that were going to circulate petitions. They made it very clear that if that bill passed, they were going to circulate petitions, not as a referendum on the bill, but a constitutional amendment. And they were going to be very restrictive. And they more or less said, if you vote for that bill, we're going to take your busing right out of it also. And that was
so
a
you
big
would have
issue.
lost everything.
I would have lost everything.
Yeah.
So I hesitate to say I made a deal with them. But they left busing out of the constitutional amendment. And busing today under the Constitution is legal and authorized. But the voters, of course, voted on the constitutional amendment and passed by an overwhelming margin, and it's in the Constitution today.
Right, absolutely. It was on the ballot in 1970, and it was very strange to see the voting patterns. And Milliken, who was elected to a full term by only 44,000 votes, may just have won because of his support for that, because he got huge support in Roman Catholic areas that he never would have probably gotten otherwise. That's very interesting. Well, you must have been one of the few people from West Michigan who did not support the bill.
That's true.
But you got something for it.
You
saved your
saved
original.
busing.
You saved busing, your
Yep.
original. Well, that is a great story. Okay. One other program that I think proved to be very successful was that Ford Fellowship Student Internship Program in the legislature. What can you tell us about that?
The money came from the Ford Foundation.
Okay.
And it was developed somewhere in one of the universities in Michigan. They developed the idea, and they had a consortium of Wayne State, Michigan State, Western Michigan, and the University of Michigan. And they were going to provide interns who were usually in a master's program or a doctoral program in public affairs or some governmental related program. And they were going to send to Lansing people that would be assigned to the governor's office, the Senate, the House, and I'm not sure if the Supreme Court was in on this. I'm not aware of that. But this was the program that they had, and it lasted for a number of years.
Many of those Ford student interns went on to illustrious careers in state government. Mary Kay Scullion, Bruce Timmons, Bob Carr, Jimmy Hoffa Jr. And wasn't there a story about Jimmy Hoffa Jr. and his future political ambitions?
That's right. You talked about the when Joe Kowalski passed away, there was going to be a
Speaker of the House
special election
in the spring of 1967.
Right, and Jimmy Hoffa Jr. wanted to run in that seat, and there was a tentative agreement that had been accepted at least by the House. I don't think we in the Senate agreed with that, and Jimmy Hoffa was assigned to the House, that they would not run for office. If there's anything a sitting House member or Senate member worries about is who's going to run against them.
Yeah.
And here's somebody that's working with your body all day long, and he's looking over your shoulder, and he knows all the secrets, and you say, hey, he may run against me.
Right.
So they put a provision in the House contract that they wouldn't run for an office if there were a vacancy. Well, Jimmy Hoffa Jr. really wanted to run, and he came to me, and I was the chairman of the entire internship program for the government, and made a strong argument that he ought to be allowed to run, and I sort of overruled the House rules and said, you may run. And he ran, and he won the primary, and then I think he lost in the general to Tony Licata.
He did. That's right.
And,
you maybe set that up. You knew he'd lose in the general, and the Republicans could win the seat.
I'd
that
like
gave
to
them their 56th vote in the House.
I'd like to take credit for it, but I don't think.
You don't think so?
I don't think I planned
You were trying
that.
to be statesmanlike and nonpartisan.
I was impressed with Jimmy Hoffa
Yeah.
Jr. He was very bright.
Well, look at what's happened since.
He was hardworking.
Sure.
He really did the job well, and I just kind of felt he should be given a chance.
So this program was really a pretty successful program.
It was successful, and I don't know why it didn't continue.
Well, maybe it's because the legislature built up its own staff.
Well, that could be.
Because you remember back in the 60s, there wasn't much staff in the legislature. You were just kind of emerging from the Stone Age,
We were. We didn't have, we shared a secretary with 4 or 5 senators.